This is Stella. For me, it's that I made a difference.
Great. I love that. All right. Well, I will introduce myself. We're going to talk for about 25 minutes. There'll be an interactive exercise that you'll get to do, and I'll drop the link in the chat if you haven't had a chance yet to click on the link that Andrea sent out yesterday. When I thought about introducing myself today, there's a lot of things I could say that I've left off. Here are some things that I thought when I was preparing this. I thought, here's what I want you all to know. And there are a range of different things, and it was useful for me to think this way rather than trying to frame it as Sue was this, Sue was that, and now she's doing this. So a variety of things. And this morning I looked at it and thought, I didn't mention my global mentoring practice. I didn't mention that I am living in the DC area, although I told you I've now happily lived in the same place for 20 years. So it was a good activity for me in introducing to say, Sue, you don't have to get everything in, because I usually start with, I was born in Syracuse, New York. I want to introduce you to an organizing framework, and this is the start of a process. You're going to finish today with a product. It won't be totally done, but it'll also be putting you on a pathway towards what I call being a multidimensional woman with multidimensional legacies and taking control of it. All right, legacy. Let me introduce you to 1990s Sue. Love the hairstyle. I wrote a document there, and I wrote a lot of things, but I wrote a handbook, internal document, promptly probably forgot about it in everything else I was doing. We used it for a little bit. Now here's 2013 Sue. I got a phone call from a friend from those days saying, Sue, I used your handbook and we're now doing a guide and we want to give you credit for this. I was thrilled, of course. Of course I said yes. But then I thought, that's interesting. I would never have known how valuable that ended up being, much later than a decade later. Meet 2010 Sue. Do you remember those cell phones? Well, it was on a cell phone like this that my nephew, graduating from college in international relations, called me and said, Sue, I think I'd like to do international work. I know you build hospitals overseas. And I thought to myself, that's the farthest thing that I do from what I actually do, which is help public health programs figure out if they're getting to the people who need their services. People don't always know what we do in our lives. So I'd like to reinforce again, don't just leave your legacy, start defining it now. Because legacy usually is associated with retirement or death. And women often get left out of it. And if you don't believe me, do what I do. Read the obituaries in the Washington Post, because a lot of my friends from overseas may show up there in case they die. And even when people who are women who are very accomplished die, I don't see legacies described in the same way. So the story gets lost, despite the fact that we are multidimensional women with multidimensional legacies. Would love to see in your camera, or if you're off camera, raise your hand. Do you think you're a multidimensional woman? Yay. I know you all are. That's why I joined this group, because it was an exciting, different perspective. I want to help you by introducing you to my 4-quadrant framework to show you ways you can begin to use it so that your story doesn't get lost. Your story, when it's told by someone else, isn't incorrect. And partly, I think, because I always like taking control of things. And if I don't do it now, who's going to do it for me? 4 quadrants. There's no magical order to these. I just tried to label them in the big aspects of what I felt our dimensions are. Life home, life helping, life health, and life work. I'm going to go through these quickly. There's a set of questions and statements. If you have your framework document, you've already seen that we'll use in an exercise to get us through that. So I started at the top right. Again, no magical order, but life home is what do you want to be known for in life? So this could be, I want grandma's recipe box. It can be, I really want to make sure I get the candlesticks. Personal memories that you want to make sure your family and friends know. Memories of each of your decades. For example, I want to make sure my two grandgirls know that I've ridden camels, both kinds of camels, one on each different continent. Life helping is what I call the area of our communities, and it's your community as you define it, or your communities. What have you contributed? How have you helped? It might help to think through what I've developed, what I've delivered, what I've donated. And on top of that, how and in what way do you reach out to your community? Because if you are no longer around or aren't able to talk to them, your family and friends may want to get in touch with them because you were an important part of a community. Life health is clearly the information that you need to leave documented for your family. Also for your children. Remember that you know many more important events than they'll realize when they get older. And if it's not written down, they won't have anybody to ask, maybe. Your biologic relatives, but also help out your spouse, significant others, other relatives, and even friends that may not have other relatives close by. Pregnancy and labor for women on an early end of our spectrum is really important. And this came home to me a few years ago when our daughter got pregnant. She and her father remembered some part, her father's my husband, John, remembered some part of her mother's labor history. But because there was a C-section early on, she didn't know whether her mother actually labored or not. At the other end of the spectrum is not just end of life decisions, but aging decisions. How do you want to age and in what way? And what is it you want versus what is it your kids may think you want? And finally, life work. So as I said with my nephew, people didn't know necessarily what I did. As I said with my colleague, I didn't realize the impact something I did would have resonance a decade later. But it's not just what your family knew about your work. It's also what were you known as and what do you feel were your unique contributions at work versus what someone else may have defined. Two areas I think are useful for us at every decade. And the reason that I'm glad there are so many younger women than me, I'm in my 7th decade, if you missed that in the introductory list. You've got anywhere from 20 to 40 years of introspection already. You have threads of your career path that you know have taken you through time that would be helpful for you to trace. So all of your family and friends may understand it or may not, or maybe it's just something you're happy you've done for yourself. So that's the framework. Before we go on, I wanted to ask, has anybody else used any kind of a tool for something similar to this? Hand raise. Emily, do you want to unmute and let me know what you've done?
Oh no, I didn't realize my hand was raised. I'm sorry.
Oh, from before. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. Anybody else? Anybody?
Sue, I'll raise my hand and say that I've done work with Kathy McCafferty Smith in this arena of thinking about the intersection of what I like, what I could get paid for and what I want to be remembered for.
Great. Thank you for that. That's a great example. Thank you. As I've been giving this talk in the last couple months, more and more I'm hearing from women that most of them haven't done that. And do you need to do this? No. Here's what happens if you don't, maybe, if you're like me. I started doing this because at age 50, I had a new family, a new husband with 3 children, just starting out as young adults. They had no idea that for over 20 years, I'd lived and worked overseas. At the same time, my School of Public Health asked me to come on a Friday morning at 8 a.m. to talk to the Public Health 101 class, which is an elective and not a requirement. So you can imagine the attention span to talk about my career path. Instead, I decided to tell them about my career path in hairstyles, technology, and all the places I lived. That at least only took 20 minutes and kept them awake. But then I started documenting every decade, every place I lived, what I did, when I went back to school. And this is an Excel spreadsheet. I'm tired of it, just showing it to you. The pandemic started, and my sisters and I, my 5 sisters and I, recorded every week starting in 1900 to try to reconnect our family history to photos we had that we didn't know from our grandma or our father, why this relative we thought was there, but also to take us forward and put together all our family memories. And as if that wasn't enough, I then decided I had to take my scrapbooks and my photos from the year I spent in England between high school and college and make a photo book, or 5 or 6, 7. And then Haiti, where I went after I finished my undergraduate as a nurse and lived for almost 8 months. Same thing, memories, diaries, and scrapbook. If you're not tired about it, I am looking at this. I was drowning in detail, but I still hadn't captured, when I realized this last year, the key sentiments and important information that I wanted to make sure go forward with me and after me. So I want to take us through an exercise. Have all of you got your framework either open or printed in some fashion? And if you don't, that's fine too. I'll leave this up on the screen and you can follow along if that's easier. Here's what I'd like us to do for 5 minutes of working. Select a quadrant, preferably not work, but if you choose work, that's fine. But one of the other life quadrants where you can make some notes on it. And I deliberately made it 1 page with a finite amount of space, so you didn't end up like Sue trying to use it as a planning document and list everything in life you need to do. This should be things that occur to you quickly, things that you don't want to forget. They don't have to be in a consistent format. No one's asking you to write a SMART objective or anything like that. Just make notes on this. And also see if I've missed anything. I would like to have you each put your head down or stare at the screen if you're typing on the screen, and I'll put a timer on for 5 minutes. So are we ready to go? Yes?
Just remind everyone real quick, Sue, that I did drop the link to the download
thank
as well as
you.
the Word document in chat. So in case you missed it from the email, I'm going to put it in here again real quick for those who didn't see it the first time.
Thank you, Brenda. I completely forgot to press the chat box where I had it loaded. So
Can you go back one screen real fast?
sure.
Just for
There
one
you
second.
go. Mhm. So select a quadrant to work in and make notes. If you run over the quadrant, that's fine, but you don't have to. And it's for you to think, here's what I want to take forward. Okay, are we all set? I'm going to start the timer now. I'll give you a 1-minute warning. You've got about a minute left. All right. Take a deep breath. And I would love a volunteer who'd like to tell me tell all of us, how did it feel to do this? Which quadrant did you choose? What was one thing that you learned or identified in doing this? Please tell me if it was useful or not. My skin is thick. If it's not useful for you, I recognize it may not be. That's great. And any changes. So does anybody want to unmute and tell us about your experience?
I'm happy to do that, or give you a very brief insight, if I may, Sue.
Sure.
I think culturally, I find this really hard. Culturally, Brits are quite reserved, and the thought of sitting here and telling you about my accolades, I can tell them over Zoom, but it's just not something we do. And so I really struggled with that. But I have to say the one section I did look at was life work, because the children's books I'm writing are actually the stories that my dad told me as a child. And so I'm quite proud of that fact that I can write his stories down. But I really struggled looking at this.
Thanks,
Sorry.
Lady Sarah. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the reminder that culturally there are differences. And it's not even whether we're British or we feel more bound to a USA growing up that we did. Cultures, it reminds me in my mentoring people who tell me they were raised not to talk about themselves. So that's a good reminder for me of what this may or may not help people with. One more volunteer.
I'll share. The one thing that I chose the life helping, and I kind of looked at all the different areas I like to help. And I kept adding to it because I'm like, well, what about this or what about that? Like the Kettle Club, I get together with my girlfriends to let off steam. I like to help my alumni friends at Walsh. And I just had a student call me with a question, and I don't work there and I haven't for a while, but they're still calling me for questions. And, I love to hunt for mushrooms and I like to help people learn about mushrooms. I love dogs. And what I've started doing is helping my neighbors walk their dogs, elderly neighbors. So it's really great to look at. There's so many different facets that I'm sure there's more, the different ways that, I'm committed to helping in the community in my life in different areas.
Thanks for that. And you know what I heard? I heard threads throughout your life of helping and hunting for information and getting it to the right people. And I hardly know you except for what you briefly shared just now. So I feel like that also is a way that this can be used. So let's talk about that next. We do have people, in fact, a week ago, someone said, Sue, I'm paralyzed doing this because I don't know where to go. And I know I've needed to do this. We talked about it early in COVID. I should do this or do something. Or we get what usually happens with Sue, but others have told me, Sue, you can't believe the pile of stuff I've got to go through. I've got one pile of papers from work, one pile of the kids' stuff. I've got stuff that I should do for updating my estate, and you're drowning in detail. I created this because I see how often women are not acknowledged for any kind of legacy. These were pictures that came up when I looked for retirement that weren't a husband and wife or a couple in some fashion having fun on a beach. And they were all men. Believe me, I looked high and low. But also, women don't often have the time to take the space and capture these things proactively. And I don't just mean because you're busy in your 40s and 50s with family and raising family and being part of the sandwich of older and younger generations. Even as I've gotten older in my 7th decade, I'm still busy enough that I don't always reflect on this. There are 3 actions short term for taking this forward if you wanted to use it. One would be to fill in all 4 quadrants. You've started at one, maybe you've almost actually finished one today. So 3 more quadrants by the end of 2022 or early 2023. The second would be to let your family know about it. Now, this is your document. It's not for them to override things to tell you what to put in. It's for you to have a discussion and say, here's what I've been thinking about. Maybe their input will be helpful, but it's more to let you have a way to verbalize it and talk about it if you wanted to. And finally, where are you going to store it? I chose to put it on my hard drive next to a folder called Death in Case of, which was recommended to me a decade ago. One woman said, you know, Sue, I bought my urn already for when I'm going to be cremated, and I put it in my towel cabinet. And I'm going to put this with other important documents there as well. Great. Another woman said, I'm going to keep it in the journal where I write down everything important for my kids. You can keep it on your desk. You can choose not to do it, but make an intentional place that you'll remember where it is, and you won't say 5 years from now, oh, maybe I want to get back to this. You've made a start at this. I think some of you are excited and may want to continue defining your legacy. But here's what I know happens. This meeting's going to end in a few minutes. You close the screen, and Sue's put one more checklist on top of the thousands of checklists you already have. And I know we all have the mental guilt for the things that we haven't done yet, and some things that aren't even written down. But I know what works, and what everybody tells me works for them is for you to have guided help, or if you prefer, an external accountability plan. And that's what I'm offering you. I'm offering you an easy short-term way to get this started for you. It would require an email address from you for me to send you an email reminder twice each month. The end of October, I know you started on the first quadrant that you've chosen. Time to finish up. Early November, why don't you go ahead and select the next quadrant you want to work on? Along with that, I'll schedule 2 15-minute sessions each month that you could drop in. These aren't chit-chat sessions. Sue's not going to talk a lot other than welcoming you. It's heads down, spend a few more minutes organizing it, that you can come to if you think that group work would help you. And then if you want to continue, I'd agree to send you an email and set up a co-working session every 6 months, because that's what others have also asked for. So you'd get an updated version of the framework for any changes and observations that I'll incorporate from you and others. And potentially this is how you could look at the beginning of 2023 with one big thing checked off your list. I'm just asking if you're willing to share your email address. You can drop it in the chat today. I'm going to give you the bit.ly link, which takes you to a form. 3 things: first name, last name, email address. Or you can open your phone right now and scan the QR code and do it now or when you finish the meeting. I'm happy to help you all take it forward, because I know that these are things we want to get done, and they don't necessarily get done in a timely fashion. And I'll leave you with this question. Are you ready to continue defining your legacy from now? So before I open it for questions or comments, I want to just acknowledge pictures from Pexels Unsplash and Pixabay. that I've been able to use in today's presentation. And I'm going to stop there and stop my share and open it for questions if there's still enough time. Stella and Deb can let me know if I think we're okay on time. For
Yeah,
a few
absolutely,
questions.
absolutely, Sue.
Yeah,
We're-
could I jump in first and just let people know I'm going to stop the recording so that way if